Okay, so I'm back. I now have a dog in my lap because this little guy was getting a little bit feisty and needs a little TLC apparently. Sorry that I have to split this into a second video, guys. I'm clearly a little rusty here off my teaching game a little bit, so sorry I'm eating up unnecessary time, but I'm going to get right back to what I left off on. We were talking about how to break down the passage, what you should be looking for, how you should be reading the piece. I don't think I said this specifically last time, but when you're identifying those moves and you're looking for those interesting little tidbits of rhetoric, whatever they may be, diction choices all the way up to, much more complicated matters like appeals to patriotism or what have you. Whatever the things are that you're seeing, you don't have time for really detailed notes over those devices. So you're mainly just underlining things and maybe putting little quick coded comments in the margins here to yourself. I wouldn't recommend anything more than just like basic little notes, okay? You don't have time to lay out very detailed explanations of why a thing is being done. This is mainly about you identifying or spotting things that you want to talk about as you begin writing the essay itself. And yeah, I was right in the middle of talking about chunking the piece, okay? It's helpful for you as the analyst to be able to see that the piece is structured in a particular way, or to note that the author is making a series of shifts from one part of the argument to another. This will be really helpful for you if you're writing the piece sequentially, which is kind of what I recommend you do, that you approach the piece as a single entity and you take me on a tour through the piece from beginning to end, talking about all the cool stuff that's happening and all the different choices the author makes from the beginning to the end. It makes it a lot easier for you to organize things if you chunk the piece appropriately and you kind of see, oh, okay, yeah, these first couple paragraphs, they're all about blah. And then this next chunk, it's taking a different approach or moving to a new step of the argument or a new part of this larger message. Even though you don't have time for a whole lot of notes, I would still be trying to think analytically. So you have a sense that the author has a larger purpose. You basically want to be asking yourself constantly, why is this being done? How is this helping the author to appeal to this particular audience? We know that he or she is reaching out to a specific group of people. It could be a single individual. It could be an audience of millions. But you have to be asking yourself, why would this choice have been made given the situation, given the purpose, given the audience that the author is trying to reach? Are you ready to sit down now? All right, we'll see if that works. If you hear a little dachshund howling here in a second, you'll know it did not. Okay, so I want to talk a little bit, just very quickly, about composition. In other words, the writing part. Really what I want to stress here, guys, is the importance for you to have a pre-write, okay? Once you've read through the entire piece, you've identified all the interesting moves, the 6 to 10 that you think you might want to talk about, you have a pretty good grasp of purpose, then you want to establish a quick pre-write, okay? What I recommend you do in your pre-write is pretty straightforward, okay? I would rattle off or build a quick little list of the stuff that you talk about in your intro and your thesis. So author, the title of the piece if necessary, all those little elements of SOAPs, and then a basic little snapshot of your thesis statement, and then outline the actual essay. When I say outline, guys, I don't mean anything that's incredibly specific. We're talking just a couple of bullet points where you establish each of the major points that you want to cover. So if you're moving sequentially, which is kind of what I recommend you do, that means, each body paragraph will focus on one chunk of the passage and explain what the big overall goal or the purpose or the function of that chunk is. And then you move to the next one and explore the rhetoric happening within it and so on. This is the approach that really makes the most sense. It will allow you to look at the piece as a coherent, functioning whole rather than, just a series of just different random isolated devices. If you do take the device-centered approach, not the best approach to take, but it's still workable. You'd want to establish, what is the structure or the strategy that I'm going to be talking about over the course of this paragraph, and how does it relate to the author's larger purpose, okay? Um, you don't need to write incredibly detailed topic sentences. You don't need to have an incredibly detailed version of your thesis. The pre-write should not be something you spend a lot of time on. It's a roadmap for you to follow, and you're the only one who's going to benefit from it. So don't worry about making it incredibly elaborate. At the same time, don't ignore it, because an essay that's unorganized is going to be a disaster. And having a game plan ahead of time also makes it a lot easier for you to just maintain pace and not get into that dreaded place where you have to pause and you're looking at what you're writing and you're thinking to yourself, I don't know where I'm going to go next. That's really, really terrifying. I don't recommend you put yourself in that place. The best way to avoid it is to have a game plan. I said here that you don't need to have a terribly catchy opening. You don't have to agonize over a hook. We'll talk a little bit more, or you guys will practice a little bit more what you should be doing in an introduction. You're basically establishing the situation that surrounds the piece and then lay out your thesis. Again, more practice on that here later. Other things to know as you're writing the actual essay. So try to avoid paraphrasing as much as you possibly can when you are actually talking about the rhetoric. It's better to quote it whenever possible, because really what you're talking about here is how specific language choices impact the overall whole. And it's hard to do that unless you quote the specific things the author said. There are cases where paraphrasing makes sense, where you're talking about features of syntax. It would not make sense for you to write out verbatim a really, really long sentence where the author is using parallel structure, if what you're trying to do is talk about the use of parallel structure. But for the most part, guys, you want to quote what the author is doing, okay? The second little bullet here, the most important thing of all, make sure that you're not just telling me over again what the meaning of the quotation is, or don't translate. It's not your job to act as the translator of the original author's meaning. Your job is to talk about how the author's choices are going to impact the audience that the author is trying to reach. Best way to do that, explain how the piece of text you're looking at lets the author accomplish something, speaking in sort of a cause-effect kind of way. So in the very most basic way, you'd be saying the author does blank in this particular place in order to accomplish blank. Or through the use of blank, the author is able to talk about what this is letting the author do to his or her audience. What's it doing to their thinking, their emotions? What kind of action is this encouraging them toward? What misconception is this correcting? You want to talk about this in a cause-effect way, all right? This is the choice that was made, and here's what it's supposed to do. As you're composing, keep in mind that it's important that you transition really smoothly and clearly from one point to the next. If you're writing sequentially, this is really, really important because you want to show that you have an understanding of the way that the passage is structured and that you understand, hey, it was done this way for a reason. Your transitions don't need to be terribly complicated. They can be simple little words and phrases that show the relationship from one part of the piece to the next, but you need them, okay? If not, your essay is going to feel like a bunch of loose observations that don't really come together. You want to try to vary your syntax, meaning you want to try to avoid using the exact same structure again and again and again, because that starts sounding redundant really quickly. That's going to lessen the chance that you're going to get that sophistication point. And most importantly, or well, at least a pretty important point, maybe not the most important, but I want to stress, guys, that you need to just keep moving. All right, your piece is not going to be perfect. It will be a draft, and it's important that you're able to accept that and recognize, hey, this might not be the prettiest essay I've ever written, and there might be some like clunky fluency problems and errors in grammar. Those are going to happen. I would suggest that you try not to dwell on them too heavily. Okay, yes, you want to be using the English language correctly, but it's also important that you guys maintain pace. Okay, I think that's all the stuff that I feel like I need to cover for just the basics of review. What I'm going to have you guys do is examine a sample prompt, look at some sample essays, talk a little bit about what you're noticing and score them, and then have you do a little bit of practice breaking down a new prompt on your own. So all that will be included in the Google Doc that I'm attaching on Classroom here very shortly. Guys, I'm going to say this again and again and again. It's very important you keep the lines of communication open. And if you have questions, get in touch with me via email as quickly as you possibly can so that I can assist you and help you out. This is all really new and weird, and it's probably not going to be like perfect. It's far from ideal, but I'm going to do everything possible to make it useful for you. And I want for you to be keeping me in the loop as to what you need or what isn't working. So I think that's everything for now. I will be signing out and eagerly awaiting to hear from you. Best of wishes, guys. Be well, take care of yourselves, and I will see you when I see you.